Coming up on Over a Barrel, gas prices are finally beginning to rise this spring. Is that actually a good thing? Well, Patrick's got some answers coming up, and it seems like it's almost a mixed bag. Over a Barrel starts right now. Welcome to Over a Barrel. If you're watching us, that's Patrick. I'm Matt. If you're listening, I promise you he's there. Patrick in the tease. We talked about gas prices going up and how that might be a good thing. Now, you know me. I've relented since the beginning of this podcast. And I've said 99 cents a gallon. I've mentally wrapped my mind around that that's probably not going to ever happen again. So I've said $1.99. Now you're trying to convince me that gas prices going up are actually a good thing. Hold on now. Talk to me a little bit. What's up with that?
Maybe not always, but for those who've been watching, oil prices have creeped up a little bit here in the last couple of days. Oil now just under the $70 a barrel mark. And Matt, while that may not be the greatest news for a lot of folks, it's also been coinciding with the stock market, which has gone up for the last couple of trading sessions. All of that happening really because there have been some hints that Trump may not move ahead with a full slate of tariffs on April 2nd. That could be positive news for the economy. Oil prices, again, going up in the hopes that there won't be as many tariffs in place. That may allow the economy to grow, which would mean more oil consumption, not only in the U.S., but abroad. So in this specific instance, there may be some good news to a slight increase in gas prices, as it could be associated with a slight increase in GDP because of the potential absence of tariffs. Now, we're still, a little over a week away from seeing what could be eventually tariffed or not. But it does seem that President Trump has backed off a little bit on tariffs, promising that there may be room for negotiation. Now, having said that, most states in the last week have seen a little bit of a jump in prices. In fact, most states, Matt, 4 out of 5 states have seen gas prices going up in the last week. That is more tied to seasonality, has nothing to do with tariffs. But most of that has to do with the final step in the transition from winter to summer gasoline, which happened last week. You're probably not filling up with it just yet, Matt, but it is starting to come proverbially down the pipeline, no pun intended. So that summer gasoline getting one step closer to retail. And the way the spot market works is, yes, that the specification has already rolled over. Now, I know a lot of folks are saying, well, why, if I'm not filling up with it, am I paying for it? The same thing happens in fall, by the way, when we make the switch back from summer to winter gasoline. The spot price of gasoline will drop, but you're still getting summer gasoline at the lower price. So it all smooths out. But bottom line, it's the seasonal factors that pushed gas prices up last week for the first time in over a month.
Okay, so let me ask you this question. As I've been driving out and about across multiple states over the past several days, I have seen a multitude of examples where maybe one station, and I'm just going to pull out some numbers off the top of my head that I see, $2.43, 50 feet down the road, $2.79, another a half mile down the road, $2.44, $2.45, and then $2.79. Is it because the cheaper stations are still emptying out the winter blend and the more expensive stations have received their shipment of more of that summer blend for the cost difference? Or what's causing? It's not too often that I see that in multiple states where it's pretty commonplace. Now, once in a while, you see that obviously out and about. But I mean, I am noticing that. I've been in 4 states in the past 5 days, and I have seen that in a very consistent pattern. And that did catch my attention.
Yeah, there may not be a whole lot of rhyme or reason for it. I know there have been a lot of price cycles, Matt, over the last couple of weeks, and you could actually be detecting, one station that has already made a cycle and another one that may not have. So, it's hard without a very specific example of why you're seeing that or where you're seeing that to say, well, this is exactly what's going on, right? Because some of these, reasons for this are very detailed. I did get this question earlier today, though. A reporter had essentially seen the same thing. That is, gas prices had been much lower at one station and higher than another. It could be that you're in a different phase in the price cycle. Right, prices here, an example for Tampa, went up yesterday to $3.19, and there's still some laggards, still some stations like Costco's is still at $2.83 a gallon. They tend to be a bit of a laggard, but a lot of the other stations are already at $3.19. So it depends on if stations are kind of actively resurveying each other, because, by the way, that's what stations do, is they take surveys of their competitors to see what their prices are, And that those surveys may take a couple of hours. Somebody may go drive around, somebody may use an online tool to look at what the retailer is down the street. And that could be the difference between you seeing a low price and a higher price is just the transition. But yeah, and the other thing too is that some stations may not have bought gasoline more recently, so they can hold a lower price. So there's a lot of potential here for why prices may be much higher or lower. And again, it's really tricky to know all the exact details on the differences there.
Yeah, I myself probably wouldn't have brought it up to you, especially in a podcast form, maybe off the wall when it's just you and myself talking. But I did notice the pattern, if you will, across more than one state, and I thought that is not something that I see often. I am price sensitive, obviously, because I travel so much, but you've taught me well over the years in interviewing you when I worked in the news media, and I interviewed you weekly for all of that time. And so I've become more price conscious and price sensitive to that. And I did notice across, and I'll name the states, Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, and Missouri. I have noticed at the price point that there is that, I don't want to call it a disparity, but certainly something that caught my attention because I don't normally see that when I'm out gazing at gas prices as I'm driving down the road. It's not usually to that extent. Some maybe a little hot spot here and there, but it's not usually on a consistent basis. Driving through 3 different metro areas and seeing something very similar to that. So you're saying gas prices already above $3 a gallon in the Tampa Bay metro area. And so like here, I just paid $2.43 the last time I filled up, but I managed to catch a gas station, actually that was still at that price point.
Yeah.
But all the other stations around it were already at like $2.79, $2.89. Are you thinking that price points in the Midwest, Upper South may top $3 a gallon soon, like
Yeah,
Tampa Bay?
probably. I think in Kentucky, I talked to a reporter yesterday from Lexington and also found that the average there was only like 265 a gallon. So yeah, if you're in Kentucky or Tennessee, you may start to see that the infiltration of summer gasoline or the impact there. I was actually pretty wowed by how low Kentucky is, and it's been a while since you've seen a price cycle, Matt. So yeah, if you're in kind of that lower southern area, or I should say upper southern Gulf states, it may be time to fill up because you could see a bit of an increase. Those 260s will probably dry up a little bit more, although if you're in the Gulf Coast, they could stick around. And again, if you're in New England, you haven't made that final transition yet to summer gasoline. So states like, some areas of Pennsylvania, New York Harbor is essentially the area of the country that hasn't made that transition over to the kind of end destination, if you will. The final step in the summer transition has not happened. So areas like New York, New Jersey, all the way northeast of there, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, Connecticut, Rhode Island. If I didn't mention New Hampshire, all of those areas have yet to roll over to the summer spec gasoline. That'll happen here in about 2 weeks' time. So if you're in that area, you're going to see a little bit of a sticker shock. Also, Matt wanted to cover something as well that came through our inbox, an over a barrel question.
Yes.
Yeah. So, at what price point relative to 87 regular octane does it make sense to fill my tank with unleaded 88, which is often a little cheaper? So, great question there. Um, from Slim. Slim emailed us. Matt, that's a great question because a lot of stations now, depending on where you're in the Midwest, something that we spoke about a couple weeks ago is that E15 is going to become more of a year-round product. E15 is also the same as unleaded 88. So unleaded 88 is kind of the marketing term. At what price point does it make sense to fill? Probably if that E15 is 10 or 15 cents a gallon lower than regular. And if your car is designed to take it, most new cars are, anything within the last couple of years. Again, check your owner's manual, but usually that cost difference, if it was me, 10 or 15 cents a gallon, because keep in mind that E15 or unleaded 88 contains slightly less BTU than something like E10. So, and it depends on how many miles a gallon you get, kind of do the math, but great question there. Usually, E15, the price point tends to be 10 cents a gallon lower. If it's not quite there, I probably would opt for just regular gasoline.
But my gas mileage suffered whenever I put my E15 in my SUV a little bit. Is that also a bit of a normalcy? And it doesn't suffer massively, but it did suffer 3-4 miles a gallon.
Well, that would be big, and it's almost impossible to actually say it suffer 3 or 4 miles a gallon because we're not lab rats, right? We're going out there driving different places. The weather may be different. Maybe you were in more of a hurry for one of your tanks, so it's actually really hard to compare directly your driving habits. If we're deliberately going to do that for a couple of tanks, try to drive with very similar rules, trying to accelerate the same pace, not go above certain speeds, then it might be a little bit more comparable. But unless you're in a lab exactly repeating the same circumstances every day, 3 to 4 miles a gallon should not be that sounds a little bit more significant than just a change in fuel. There may be a slight hit of 1 to 3%, but your 3 to 4 miles a gallon definitely sounds too high. And there's probably other comparisons there that make, doing a true E10 to E15 comparison really hard to do. And that's the
Possibly.
difficulty out in the wild.
That's possible, but I'm going to drag you on a road trip one day, and you'll find out what a litmus test I can be.
I would love to see exactly, if you can position your foot just so perfectly and
Hmm.
and just repeat it. I mean, that's why we have labs, right? Is because humans are very imperfect. And Matt, I think one of the best things, speaking about imperfect, is if you ask like 20 Americans to drive 25 miles an hour in a circle, have you seen those studies where literally we cannot keep pace? People will not go 25 miles an hour. And that's why, by the way, traffic jams happen, is because you get slower people who are just kind of more chill, that aren't paying attention, and you have all these other people trying to get around them. So that's why moving traffic jams, and by the way, being stuck on I-4 between Tampa and
Oh,
Lakeland, I-4, for anyone that's ever traveled
yeah.
between Tampa and Orlando, is already enough of a parking lot. But you're introducing the human factor, Matt, is that humans are really bad at kind of paying attention and being able to maintain the same speed. And so likewise, I'm going to say myself and yourself, we're probably not the best for being able to exactly carbon copy compare how we drive for one tank of gas to another. So, to point out though, you're correct. There's not as much energy packed in E15 or unleaded 88 as there is E10. It does contain less BTU, less British thermal units. So basically, with that lower energy, you're likely to notice, as I mentioned, a 1 to 3% degradation in fuel mileage. So a 3 to 4 mileage per gallon drop is much larger than 1 to 3%, which is why I wonder if maybe your driving habits were different.
I mean, it's possible. I will say this. You and I drive the same vehicle, make and model. I think we're different years, but not by a huge amount. My owner's manual says nothing higher than E10. I
Right.
was in a state where there's nothing lower than E15 by state mandate whenever I filled up at that point in time. Happened to be Nebraska. But the key for the matter with, I didn't get an option. I had to fill up with E10, E15, I should say, because there was no such thing as E10 in Nebraska, at least on the roads that I was on. And the way that I have understood it to be is that E15 has become the state norm in Nebraska. And there are other states beginning to adopt that as well. Missouri is also in the process of adopting something very similar. But I know specifically the owner's manual for my vehicle says nothing higher than E10. I don't know how unhealthy it is for the vehicle, but whenever I don't get an option, I don't get an option. So, thoughts and comments on something like that. Your vehicle,
Yeah.
I think it's a couple of years
It,
newer than mine, and it may be
it
fine.
also warns against anything above 10%. Interestingly enough, Matt, in Nebraska, beginning in 2024, new or significantly remodeled retail fuel stations must advertise and sell E15 from at least 50% of their gasoline dispensers. So I
Yeah.
wonder if you pulled up to a bunch of the dispensers that maybe didn't have E10, but I don't know. To my knowledge, there's not any mandate in any state that requires no E10 can be sold at all. E15, if anything, would be side by side, and maybe E10 was hidden somewhere else, but I don't believe any state has yet taken the step of not offering E10. Right? Even some of the stations in Iowa, they basically the only product you can get that has 10% or less ethanol is actually 91 octane,
Hmm.
and they're not real great at disclosing what their ethanol content is. So
So the only sticker that I saw, and I'm just the consumer, right? And I can't speak to the exact notions there, but I did fill up multiple times in Nebraska whenever I was there. And this is just one state, not picking on Nebraska, because I know Missouri and other states are adopting this as well, but my experience. And the only sticker that was on the gas pump was talking about E15 and how, and there was no other option. It was the single sole sticker. And the way it read was, it didn't matter basically what octane level you were purchasing. It was going to contain up to 15% E15 type of a situation with no option for an E10. And I shopped multiple brands. In fact, at one exit, I went, there were like 3 or 4 gas stations, and I'm like, okay, I know my owner's manual says don't do this. I tried all 4 or 3 or however many were there, and there wasn't a single one that gave me an option for anything less than E15, at least per the sticker. Now, what we see, on that aspect, and I would be interested in seeing and hearing from anybody who's watching or listening and maybe in one of the states that's already adopted some of that, like maybe what some of their experiences happen to be. Yeah. I can only tell you what I visually saw, whether or not what was in the big tanks at the gas stations or not. I can't speak to that, obviously, but
and if
I'm
you
curious.
are one of those folks that wants to reach out to us, shoot us an email to podcast@gasbuddy.com with your experience. We'd love to hear about it and talk about it down the road.
And you even had a brand new bridge open in Tampa Bay today, the Howard Franklin Bridge, opening up a nice 8-lane monster across the bay as well. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because of some uniqueness to it, in that half of the 8 lanes are going to be express tolls, and a little bit of a different configuration there as well, to hopefully allow for faster travel. In other words, saving you a little bit of fuel instead of being stuck in
fuel and costing me more tolls.
Exactly. But you will save a little bit in fuel because you're not just sitting there in a parking lot and breathing in the person in front of you's exhaust. So there is that one
something tells
possible option.
I'm going to be sitting in even more traffic than before. I mean, now there's room for extra traffic, kind of like I-4, right? You can add another 10 lanes to that, and it would still be a parking lot.
You're not
all
wrong.
Slow people go the same speed.
You are not wrong. And that is, I have driven I-4 more times than I care to admit to, living there for years. And yes, it is a parking lot on a good day. It's the I-4 corridor. And you've probably heard that in a lot of political coverings, the I-4 corridor in Florida. That's kind of what decides who's going to, how the state will go depending upon Republican or Democrat. And that's just kind of one of those things as well. Yeah. Lots of folks that live there. And that interstate is definitely a well-traveled interstate between Tampa and Orlando, no question.
Make no doubt about it. And along with it, as we mentioned, gas prices had shot up yesterday here in Florida, and I've been getting a lot of these questions. Florida is now kind of a market that does see the cycling, and it makes it really hard to loop people in on exactly what's happening. Because Florida is now cycling, along with Great Lakes, Kentucky cycles. I think areas of Texas cycle. There's a lot more of these markets, Matt, that are cycling. What we mean with cycling is that gas stations will basically ignore any slight fluctuations in the wholesale price, and they'll continue to undercut each other until stations are basically selling at or below their cost. And then they'll raise their price, not only to pass along any increases in their costs since the last time they went up, but they also restore their profit margin from basically, 0 or 5 cents a gallon back all the way up to 35 or 40 cents a gallon. So when you couple the fluctuation in the wholesale price since the last time they've gone up, if the wholesale price goes up 20 cents and their margin is going from nothing to 30 cents, that's a 50-cent jump. So we're seeing more and more of these markets, and I think there's a lot of curiosity on why the heck these prices do this. Well, a lot of the time it's because they're maybe a big station that basically has this as a pricing strategy. But, we're seeing it here in Florida, and a lot of folks, I think actually politically, some of the bigger political activists on Twitter earlier this week were saying, look at Florida, the lowest prices since December 20. Well, I think they actually said lowest price in 3 or 4 years, but it was actually lowest since December of 2023. But also kind of lousy comparison, because when they were mentioning this yesterday, the price of gasoline in Florida was taking a big jump up to $3.19 to $3.29 a gallon. So it's
where was it at before then?
Of the lowest price, 23. Say what?
Where was the price point at before the sudden jump?
A lot of stations here in Tampa were in the 280s. Some of them were in the 290s. I saw a 281, and that station is now 319. So, I mean, we're talking about a pretty hefty jump. But the interesting thing here, as the summer gasoline changeover is starting in more areas, for the first time in over a month, the national average did jump about 6 cents a gallon last week. And that probably won't be the end of it. But no, it's not political. It's not related to tariffs. The price of oil is up a little bit compared to where it was last week, but all of this is seasonal. How many episodes you and I have talked about the seasonality,
Right.
refinery maintenance, the changeover to summer gasoline, and rising demand, spring break travel. So, what we're seeing right now is simply normal. We're a couple of weeks away from the potential of tariffs, but for now, this is gas prices doing what they do. They go up in the spring and they fall in the fall.
All right. So I saw about a 40-cent jump in any kind of a price point increase that I've seen in the multiple states that I've been in the past week as well. Let's very quickly, before we run out of time here, you've mentioned the T word multiple times, tariffs, and how it is not impacting the price yet.
Right.
Are you seeing a situation where very soon we may see the tariff increase start to be factored in at the local pump anywhere in this country, including in the Northeast, where the gasoline basically comes from Canada and is a lot more sensitive to that tariff talk?
Yeah, great question. I think, having gone through tariffs for a brief period of time back in early March and how the stock market reacted, the stock market basically just plummeted. We've gotten some little snippets from the Trump administration, some hints here and there. Even in the last week or so, Trump has basically suggested that tariffs are now, there's room for negotiation. The stock market liked that. The stock market has jumped the last couple of trading sessions because if Trump is softening his tone on tariffs, there is a possibility that he may give a carve out to Canadian energy. If enough people are whispering in his ear that the impacts that this could have, there may not be an impact from tariffs on the price of gasoline. In fact, if tariffs are softened, there's the possibility that that could be better for the economy. And what's better for the economy is generally going to mean maybe potentially more jobs, but more gasoline consumption. If people have more certainty over where the economy is heading, they'll be more likely to take trips, jump on a plane, spend money. And so generally, the thinking is if tariffs are softened, it could provide a psychological boost, which will then translate to more demand and higher prices. So we'll have to see. We're only a little away from 2 weeks. And by the way, since the last time we spoke, now Canada's new PM, Mark Carney, has called for snap elections in Canada. That is going to be set for April 28th. So a lot still tied up, but it does appear that Trump is softening his tone on tariffs, which would be good news for the economy, but that could mean gas prices aren't as low. I'm not going to say they're going to jump because keep in mind the national average today, by the way, is still 42 cents lower than last year at this time. Americans actually spending about 1.1 billion, yes, with a B, $1 billion less on gasoline every week right now compared to last year. So I think it would be really advisable for Trump to soften the tone on tariffs, implement some where it makes sense, especially I think most of us can agree. Tariffs on cheap Chinese goods is probably good for US. I think attacking our partners like Canada and Mexico, probably not so good. Um,
Well, and the Mexican president, to your point, the Mexican president actually, and President Trump actually said that he liked the idea, brought it up to President Trump about collectively Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. Placing a tariff on China.
and I think, by the way, that's where we need to go is aiming collectively at China. They have no regard for U.S. Intellectual property or really anyone else, right? They steal ideas, they manufacture things really cheaply. Look at their economy, look at their GDP, look at deficits with China. I think to your point, the U.S. would be better served aligning with Canada and Mexico and exerting more maximum pressure on China.
Anything else out there with the current administration that gives you a moment of pause? Any geopolitics, things like, Greenland, Canada becoming the 51st state? I mean, I could go on. There's a lot out there, but is there anything else out there that sticks out in a petroleum analyst's mind as saying, hey, that's something we need to keep a watch on because if this moves in one direction or the other, it could impact crude oil prices either for the better or for worse?
Yeah, another great question. I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on the elections in Canada. Obviously, we have two very distinct candidates. Obviously, there's been Trump has not really endorsed one, but Trump has said that he prefers Carney. Very interesting dynamics up there. Obviously, Canada is one of the largest oil producers of heavy oil. Keep in mind as well, Matt, the big part of this conversation is the US just passed fresh sanctions on Venezuela. Basically, Trump said anyone that buys Venezuelan crude oil is going to be subject to a 25% tariff. We'll have to see if China, which is the primary buyer right now of Venezuelan oil, will that inspire China to stop buying oil from Venezuela? The other thing is fresh sanctions on Iran. The Houthi attacks, right? The Trump administration has been going after the Houthis. So we'll have to see how that dynamic between Iran and Venezuela shifts the conversation. But I think the election in Canada, Matt, and broader tariffs, all very interesting things to watch. I think for now, gas prices will probably go up a little bit. There's more risk of prices going up at the pump than going down. Diesel, it's the opposite, Matt. Diesel prices have actually declined at the same time gas is going up. Keep in mind, as temperatures are warming up, the warmer weather means less heating oil consumption. Heating oil and diesel are basically the same thing. So diesel could trend lower. Tariffs could have a role. Tariffs, I mean, diesel's really the fuel of the economy, right? So interesting dynamics there. But I think for most of us, not a huge jump in gas prices, but a moderate, slow, and steady increase, except for those areas that engage in price cycling. And for you, Matt, watch out in Kentucky because the markets that haven't gone up yet, Kentucky, Tennessee, maybe the Gulf and areas of the Northeast, the Mid Atlantic, have not yet made that full switch over to summer gasoline. And when that happens in the next couple of weeks, there will be a pinch. So be
So
ready for it.
should I fill up before I leave for Missouri and Illinois tomorrow through the weekend? What should I do then? Should
I
I?
would fill up. I mean,
Okay.
I'd rather you have a full tank through these areas. Don't the moment you don't fill up is the moment prices are going to be higher. So that's my advice. But use the Gas Buddy app. That's the best advice. People say, should I fill up now or then? Well, I don't know because I don't know. There may be carve outs. There may be special circumstances. If you're going into Kentucky, that's a state that price cycles. Tennessee doesn't really price cycle as much, although I've noticed in Chattanooga's starting to price cycle too. So the best advice, check Gas Buddy, maybe Google. Google gets a lot of its gas price information from Gas Buddy. So check those apps. When you get to a quarter tank, Matt, throw your address in the Gas Buddy app and start looking around on the map view that we have. It's terrific. And by the way, we just rolled out an improved Gas Buddy pay card that now we used to save you up to 30 cents a gallon with deal alerts. Now it's up to 33 cents a gallon with deal alerts. So
Ooh.
check out the new Gas Buddy Pay, the Gas Buddy Pay Plus card, I believe is our official marketing. It's not a bad time to sign up. And by the way, now if you use your Gas Buddy card in the convenience store, you can also save up to another 3 cents a gallon for every $20 or $25 in purchases you make inside the C store.
You had me at savings. I'm just throwing it out there. Patrick DeHaan, as always, thank you so much for all of the insight. We have so much that's going on in this world, and it is always a unique conversation every week that morphs and changes as the activities do across the globe, and we never seem to run out of things to talk about. So I appreciate it very, very much. Listen.
And thanks to my co-host, Matt, as well. Always asking the thought-provoking questions on stuff. So let's give out a huge shout out to Matt, the co-host, who, by the way, is also the producer of many of these episodes. Matt, we all appreciate you. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be listening today. So.
Yeah. Well, we both work hard, right? So, I mean, that's the fun part. And so, yeah, listen, for those of you listening, you can obviously watch on YouTube. For those of you on YouTube, you can obviously listen as you're driving down the road. Please listen, don't watch, just say. And if you're a passenger, that's a different story.
And Matt, some exciting new changes coming up in the next couple weeks too. I wanted to preview that, in a couple weeks, we have some exciting changes to the podcast that we are engineering right now. So stay tuned. We'll have more on those details in the next couple of episodes of Over a Barrel. But Matt, go ahead. It's all you on the lead out.
All right. That's going to wrap up this edition of Over a Barrel. We will talk again coming up really soon. Have a good one.
See you later.